Okay, I think we can start more or less. I hope that that everybody of you is here. Okay, so today we are going to talk about React Router, specifically version 6, that is the last version of this very famous library. So, as the subtitles say, application have more than one page, and we are going to exploit this functionality today. So, the outline of the lesson of today is quite easy. We are going to discuss the objective and problems that are solved by this library. And then we are going to exploit this solution, the solution of React Router, that is, as the name suggests, a library that will help you to manage some routes. So, let's start from objectives and problems. We would like to support complex web application. This because currently we manage simple web application, single page application. That is the paradigm that React and the guys of Facebook have in mind when they design the React framework. But users are used to switch between many different page layout. In fact, if you think about it, usually when you exploit an application, you are used to have different layout, different kind of pages, and not just a page in which the main content changes. That is what we did actually with the React Score example or during the labs. What we want to achieve is managing the flow of navigation across a set of pages. And something that we lost with a single page application is the possibility of using the buttons that are available in the browser. So the back button, the forward button, the possibility to insert something inside the bookmarks are a set of features that we lost, and we would like to have it back using exploiting this library. In this way, we allow the URL to convey information. That is something useful and very exploited usually in the traditional web paradigm that we temporarily stopped using single page application. In addition, having a single page application will give us the possibility to have a knowledge base, a set of states, a set of props, something that you exploit during the lecture, during the labs. So having a mechanism that is still a single page application but behave like a multi-page application will give us the possibility to don't lose the knowledge base that is stored in JavaScript and keeping the state across the page changes. So here you find some example of what I'm talking about. If you have a look at this example, these are pages from Facebook, because you should remember that React is a library of Facebook, so it seems a good use case to show you how Facebook manage its layout. And for instance, if you go in the home of Facebook, in the root, you will have that we have a page with a right column in which you can find all the friends to which you want to talk, or not, and three different layout, three different columns. We have, probably you remember that Facebook has a bar, a nav bar in the top that is always there. So in this case, we have three column layout and a fixed column on the right. But for instance, when we go inside a profile, we have what Facebook called diary a few years ago. I don't know if this term is still used, but that was the name when they exploit this change of layout. And here you have a fixed picture that takes the space that here was taken by three column, and then you have two columns. So you can see that the layout is changed, but you should know that Facebook is a single page application. So the layout changes, but the application not. So this is faked through mechanism like router. Here you have a different example in which you have an additional navigation bar under the first one that is present also here. You can see that the profile, the page layout for profile is quite different from the page layout of pages, of business pages and something like that. So this is what we would like to achieve exploiting the React router or similar library. So some use cases that we can achieve in this way, we already anticipate something like that, but you can have some master list or detailed view, as you can see in this layout, in which you can, for instance, specify a certain category, specify something more. We would like to have a difference between the layout of a logged in user and not logged in user. That is something that we are going to explain in the end of the course, when we will add also the backend and the authentication part. We would like to have a sidebar navigation. That is something, for instance, that you partially developed during the labs with the filter part of your application. Is more or less a sidebar navigation that you put on the left. We would like to exploit this mechanism, creating different routes. You will see in the next lab, we will create different routes for each filter. And as I said before, we would like to organize the page to have different content view. As I already anticipated, we would like to use the URLs again for navigate in the site, because users, and I guess also you, because you are not only a programmer, but you are also a user of our application, we are used to have different pages. We are used to digit something in the URL and see that something different happens on the page. And when we change page, we have a different URL, and vice versa. When we change URL, we have a different page. That is something that we want to exploit. And URL also embed information about IDs, about data, categories, filter, and so on and so forth. Here you can find some example always from Facebook. You can see that we are used to have facebook.com/profile name, facebook.com/profile name /post/a post ID. If we change this ID, we move to a different post, and so on. And one of the main advantages of having URL is that you can save, you can share, you can bookmark them. If you are interested in this specific post and you want to keep it for the future, you can create a bookmark with that. If you want that your friends see a specific post, you can share it, the link to this. And actually, with our single page application, we can do that, because we are never exploiting URL. For instance, if you remember, you always have localhost semicolon 3000 and nothing more. Even if you add an exam, you filter the list of movies that we created in the labs, and something more. And as you can see here, you can also have the deep linking paradigm. So you can create several steps of linking. That is something that, as I already said several times, we want to achieve now. And the possibility to go back and forward. Okay. Yes, obviously, you have to keep in mind, this is specifically to React. You have to keep in mind that we are not breaking React, also introducing the routes, but we are still working in the same way. So when your application is mounted, is built, you will always get index.html on which is mounted index.js. What is changed is the way in which the page is rendered. So we are going to see how this library select which components will be created at runtime according to the URL. But the mechanism is still the same. We just have that you will digit the URL in the browser, and the application fetch this URL and use it to give you the proper set of functionalities. So we conclude this introduction, and we finally start to exploit the functionalities of React Router. As I said to you before, specifically, we are going to talk about React Router version 6 that is quite new. So if you have a little bit of experience with version 5, unfortunately, I have to say you that a lot has changed since last year. So I don't know if some of you give or try to give the exam last year when we used React Router version 5. You will see that the stuff is a little bit different. Obviously, not so much. The concepts are always the same, but some part of the library are changed. So again, we are going to address the problems associated with the multi-page navigation and URL management. That usually, this kind of problem, I mean, if you want, you can start coding something by yourself. You can try to implement something. You can fetch the URL, process the URL, and render the component according to the URL inserted. But we would, I mean, it's never a good idea to develop something that other developers already did. So there are several router libraries that you can use to achieve this goal. And as I said several times, we are going to use a library that that is simply called React Router. That is probably, or router, it depends of the pronunciation that you prefer, but that's the concept. So as is very difficult to imagine, this is just a JavaScript library that manages routes. This library can also modify the location of the app. You can force the application to go to a different URL. And as I already told you, you can also determine what React component you would like to render in the specific location. So what the library did and what you can do if you would like to implement a mechanism like that by yourself is the user write a URL. You prevent the browser from fetching the next page. That is the default behavior of this. I mean, when you write something in the URL, the browser tries to fetch what you insert here. So you prevent this mechanism. And we instruct the React application to switch in and out the components that we need. So as I said to you before, you can think about, you can imagine routes are a set of conditions in which if this kind of path is matched, please render this component, or if this other path is matched, show this other component. Okay, so as I already said, or I never explicitly say that, but if we need a library, you can imagine that. React does not contain a specific router functionality, so this is the reason why we need to import a different library. But this is typical of React philosophy. I don't know if any of you have experience with Angular, for instance, but Angular give you a very wide set of functionality, a very wide set of functionality that you can exploit to create your app, while React has a very minimal approach in which the core library has only the minimum set of functionality that you need, and everything more that you need have to be imported with a different library. So as I said before, we are going to use React Router. You can install it using this command that is npm install React Router DOM. I would like to bring your attention to the fact that there are many sub-libraries of React Router, because React Router could be used for client side, for server side in a more complex project, and also for React Native. So you have the React Router core, I would like to say, that contains the main components needed for the library to work. And then you have some specific component for the DOM or for native. Just to give you a quick information about, I don't know if everybody of you know what React Native is an additional framework always created by Facebook that will give you the possibility of implementing native application for mobile, for iOS, for Android, still using the React paradigm. So you write something in JavaScript, and then the library will build this set of code in components that are property, I mean not property, but native to the operating system. So you can when you will have experience with React, you could try to use also React Native to develop some application. If you are interested in this part, for instance, we have the web application course here in Politecnico that will, it is more focused on Android operating system, but has also a part about React Native. So the competencies that you gain here could be used also for that course. But I mean, the concept is you can reuse also React Router for React Native application. So they develop a core library, and then they develop some pieces that you can add on top to others. Yeah, do you have a question? Okay. Okay, I repeat also to be sure that is in the recording. The name of the course is Web Application Development. It's quite easy. It's an optional course of the second year. In the end, if I correctly remember, is of Professor Malnati, and it's a very, very nice course, very interesting. If you like this kind of content, I would like to remember you, if you are interested in knowing more of the possibility of the possible course that you can take after this one. In the first set of slides, we give you a quick graph in which you can find all the reference, because, for instance, if you are interested in specifically in the front end, you could follow the human-computer interaction course that is follow-on design. You have distributed programming that is more focused on connected, the back end and the front end. Web application 2 that is more focused on the back end, or web application development. So you have a wide set of possibility to go deeper if you are interested. Okay, I think that's all about that. Okay, some features. As I said before, thanks to this library, we can connect the React app with the browser native navigation feature. So when you successfully add the React Router library, you will see that you can go backward and forward, for instance. You can have the history, and you start using again this functionality that is typical of web application. As already anticipated, you can selectively show components according to the current routes. And we will see now some rules for matching the URL fragments that are quite easy indeed. It's a library easy to integrate and understand. It's not something very complex. From one side, just because it uses normal React components. I'm not sure about version 6, but since version 5, the slogan of the library was "It's just React," to highlight the fact that it's a library very integrated with the framework. And the components has name pretty easy to understand. You have the link that will give you the possibility to go to a certain location. The navigation link, that is a kind of link designed explicitly for navbar, so it has implicitly the possibility to select which link is active, and some component to navigate, so to go to a different location again. You have some components to render, so we have the routes, that is the main components in which you will have to specify the different component, and the route, which is the specific component or specific set of components that you would like to render when a path is matched. And this library will give us also several hooks. Probably you remember that when we talk about hooks, we say that React has a set of hooks that we are currently using, like, for instance, the useState hook that will allow us to create a state. But React gives also the possibility to developers to create their own hooks. And so here, for instance, we have additional hooks that we are going to explain and discuss. To work, it is important that the whole application is wrapped inside a browser root container. So we are going to see that the first thing to do when we start coding is to take the entire application and put them inside browser router to say to the React that we want to exploit this functionality. Here you have a quick overview. Now, after a while, we start developing something, but to give you an idea, you can see that from a certain part of your application, you will explain that there are several links. For instance, one to the root, one to the about page, one to the dashboard. And then in the core of your application, imagine that here you could have other components that are not routed, so you can have the fixed part of your application. And then this part is all embedded inside the browser router that we are talking a few seconds ago. So you can see that it's quite straightforward, that for this part, we would like to render this element, for this part, this element, and so on and so forth. So, as I said, as I probably let you understand, there are many routing mechanisms. So, for instance, the more famous are the browser router, the hash router, and the static router, just to give you an idea. As you can imagine, here we put this emoji to let you know that this is the preferred approach, the one that we are going to exploit, but many other exist that could be used if you need to exploit different paradigm or different functionalities. The browser router is the, as we can say, use the normal URLs and the HTML5 location API, so is particularly suggested if you are developing in HTML5. That is what almost every developer do nowadays. So it's recommended for modern browsers, but has a drawback that requires some server configuration. That is very, very simple. We are going to see that when we are discussing about Express and the server side. Simply, you have to import it using this command, as we already did. It's a module like many other that we use so far. So import browser router. If you want, you can rename it as router to give it a simple name from the React Router DOM. Remember that we are going always to address this particular sub-library that is React Router DOM. Just to spend a couple of words about hash router, as you can imagine from the name, this route uses the hash symbol instead of the slash, which is quite common in old application, because older browsers are not able to fully understand that when you, with traditional browser router, you write a URL like the one that we see before. So I don't know, facebook.com/user/post number 5. While with hash router, your URL are like facebook.com/user/ post number 3. So you do not use slash, but you use sharp or hash, you would like to call them. That is easiest for the browser to understand that you are not going to really visit a different page, but you're looking for something like an anchor. So you're looking for a part of the page. Actually, we do not recommend to use them unless for compatibility reasons, or if you can't have access to the backend. So if they give you a fixed backend and you are not able to enable the possibility of using routes, now, so if you want to implement this kind of mechanism and create a single page application, you are forced to use this kind of router. But otherwise, you can forget about hash router and you will use the browser router for the entire duration of the course. And as I said before, you must wrap the entire app. I already anticipated them to you, but as I said before, to use browser router, we need some server configuration. Actually, we are developing using the React development server. It is something that React gives us for free to start put in practice the React philosophy. So actually, we don't need to do anything to enable browser router. You just have to import the library and using them. But from next week, we are going to start talking about Express. We are start talking about a little bit of back-end development, not so much, because this is something that, as I said to you before, will be exploited for you in web application 2 or in distributed programming. But we're going to talk a little bit about Express, and as you can see, basically adding this 3 line of code, you are instructing your server that do not have to fetch you a page, but have to enable this paradigm of routing, because how can I say, the traditional behavior of a server when you ask for, I don't know, facebook.com/post/something, the default behavior is looking inside a folder. So if you specify /post, the default behavior is looking if inside the main directory of the server there is a subdirectory called /post from which the server could give you a resource. And if you have an additional slash, the server try to match the whole URL to match it to a file that is inside the server. So through this mechanism, we are disable this stuff, and we said basically you have always to give back index.html, because it's the React application that knows how to manage the URLs. Okay, so let's start discussing of how to use the library. The default behavior is the selective render, so we'll have alternative version of the same component, and they have to be wrapped inside these routes components that say all of them are different components that I would like to render when you enter a URL. So each alternative is represented by a different route. The route with the most specific match will be rendered. This is something different from version 5. This is an improvement, if you want, or just a change of paradigm, because since version 5 you have to specify the route entry in a very strict way, because the library try to match it one by one. So for instance, if you, instead of /news, if you write something that could be even matched by /news, for instance, using a variable, we are going to see them in a few seconds, the library could match the other route. So it's important was important to specify that entry in the right order. Actually, the library is a little bit smarter and will give you always the best match, so the most specific. You have to think about that when you develop when you specify the routes. So each route specifies the URL path matching requirement, and the main component that you have, the main props that you have to pass to the route are the path, that is the URL that should match, and a JSX element that will be rendered when the best match occurs. So again, as we already see in when we develop the component, when we return something, it is always important that here you put only a single component. You cannot specify several JSX elements, but you have to return just one. Obviously, as we already did in the previous exercise, if you need to have more component, you can always use a fragment. That is the React trick to specify several elements in a fixed place. So here a few words about the path. I already anticipated something to you because I already said this stuff about the specific match. Here, for instance, you can find an example in which, because the path could be made by different segments. Static segment, so facebook.com/users, and you will get the entire list of users. Or dynamic segment, so users/user ID, or simply /user ID. For instance, if here we have two different routes, users/user ID, which is a variable that will be filled by the browser, or users/ I don't know, info, it could happen that info is managed as a variable, as user ID. This is something that could happen on version 5, in which if you put users/info under users ID, you will never get this match because the user ID was above and was always matched before. Thanks to this new implementation, if you insert here users/info, you are sure that the library take care of that. So you will able to get this route because we have a best matching. You can also specify that you want case sensitive. So you can write a URL with lower and uppercase, but honestly, it's not a suggested approach because usually we are more used to have a web that is case insensitive, at least for URL. Having a case sensitive URLs, in my opinion, is a little bit error prone, but if for a certain reason you need it, you can exploit it, specifying this option inside the route. An additional feature of version 6 of React Router is the possibility of nesting routes. That is something that was a little bit more tricky in older version. So the routes may follow the layout hierarchy of the interface components. This is something that was designed because it's very typical, as we see in the previous example, that you have some part of the page that you want to always render, and some part that you would like to conditional render. So nesting the routes could give you this possibility to exploit more specific layout. So it is possible to nest a route inside another route component, and it is important to notice that the path will be concatenated. So if a route is nested inside another one, this route will be matched only if the combination of the two path props are matched by the whole URL. Again, all route element in best patching path will be rendered. Something that is a little bit tricky when you start developing with this approach is that you have to remember that the parent component have to contain in a specific point the outlet component, which is an additional component offered by the library. This is necessary because even if the hierarchy is clear, so when you specify an inner route, you know that this route, this part of the application will be displayed inside under the part that contains the footer. The React application doesn't know which is the point in which you want to display this children component. So you have to put this outlet tag somewhere to give user to specify explicitly where you want to render the children component. There is a death mark here because it's something that happen a lot, that you develop the application and you say, I can't understand why I don't see this child component. Usually the reason is that you simply forget outlet, and if you forget this tag, the children will not be displayed. So here again we have an example, a little bit more complete. We have a very simple application, a div, an h1 tag, a set of routes, but this time the routes are nested. So we have the route that is rendered when you match the slash, so the root, the localhost semicolon 3000, and then we specify two different subpaths. One that is rendered when we hit about, and one that is rendered when we hit dashboard. So if we write slash about, we are going to display the about component. If we write slash dashboard, we are going to display the dashboard component. These two components are displayed, not both of them, but the one that match the path is rendered inside the layout component. So here, for instance, you have an example of the about component, very, very simple, just a div with the about h2 tag. And here we have the layout component. As you can see, we have a div, we have a navigation bar, in which you can imagine to have the about and the dashboard links, for instance, or many other links. We have an horizontal rule, and then the outlet component. This is necessary to specify, please show the about component or the dashboard component in that specific point, not before the HR tag, not under the div, not before the nav tag. This is a specific point in which we want to render that component. So it's not difficult, but it's something that you have to remember, because if you forget it, the application doesn't be rendered as you expected. Then we have some special routes. For instance, we have the index route. That is something that I suggest you to think as the default case of a switch. I guess that everybody of you have experience with C programming language. So when you write a switch, you will specify different cases that you can think as the routes. And in the end, you specify a default case, which is the one in which you fall when nothing match. So, I mean, a default case for inner route, so for child routes. So when you have, as in the example that we see before, for instance, when you hit /about, you will have a behavior. When you hit /dashboard, you will have a behavior. And you will have a default behavior that is specified by the slash, because inside slash, we have this layout element. We simply will have an empty outlet component if we go in the slash path. But imagine to remove this route, or to do not give a path to this route. What happens when you specify slash? Nothing will be rendered, because you do not have a default behavior. And you can easily achieve you can create something default using this index element. Imagine, for instance, having, I don't know, about /dashboard, for instance. What is rendered when you hit about slash? Nothing. Introducing this kind of tag will give us the possibility to render something. So here are the use cases. So index routes match when a parent route matches, but none of the other child match, as I told you before. Index route are the default child route for a parent route. So that, for instance, we can imagine this case without this element. And index routes render when the user hasn't clicked one of the item in a navigation list yet. So something to display. It's a little bit old as paradigm, but there are some web applications that when start, they say to you in the main content, please select something from the left sidebar or from the top nav bar or something like that. It's something that you can achieve using this component. We have two other different special routes. We have the layout route, which is something that is used to wrap some children that has a common layout part. Is a route without any path. So it is always rendered, and it's mainly used to wrap this kind of component. It's something like, I don't know, you can think about the fragment component of React. It's something like that, something that you use just for commodity, I mean. And then what we are for sure going to use is the no match route, which is the how can I say, the real default case of a switch. So you specify the list of routes that you want to match, and in the end you say, okay, if you do not hit anything of that, please go to that route. So I don't know, just to give you an example, you can think of something like that. When you go, for instance, on the page on GitHub, okay, you can see this is the page of our web application. you can think about like this URL is matched by a route, which is parametric. If here we write something that doesn't have no sense, GitHub will display you a 404 page. This is not the web page you are looking for, which is a default page that is always rendered, doesn't care what I write here. So this is something that you get using the no-match route. Okay, here we have another example, a little bit more complete. So for instance, as we still have the main path here. We have an index element here, which, as you can see, doesn't have a path. So what happened here is that we always render layout component, which is the top element on the slash. And then if you, for instance, write /about, you will have the about component rendered always in the outlet. Or if you specify the dashboard, you will always have this element here. If you don't specify nothing, so if you just enter localhost 3000, you will get the layout component because it's something specified here. And inside the outlet, you will get also the home component because it's the default case of the inner route, as I said to you before. In addition, we have also the star path, so the real default case, which is rendered when you write, not when you go to localhost 3000, because this is something that is managed by the main route here. But if you write localhost 3000 / and you write something more, you will still have the navbar, the horizontal rule, the div, so all the components that you have here. For instance, if we go back to the GitHub page, you can see that here you have the navigation bar of GitHub, and in the bottom you will have the footer of GitHub, which is something that is rendered also, for instance, in the web application 1 profile, because the bar is the same, and if you go down, the footer is the same. So you can think about that like the div, the nav, and the outlet part is rendered according to the path that you match. Obviously, the GitHub website is just an example because GitHub is not developed in React. I would like to specify that, but just to give you an idea that the concept is still the same. Then we have the part related to the navigation. The navigation gives us the possibility of changing the location URL, so to force the application to go in a different page that will be then managed by the React app and by the router library. We have two different options. We have a React component, which is linked to something that creates a router-aware hyperlink that is activated by user click. Or we can use a hook, which is useNavigate, that returns a function to trigger navigation. It is very useful inside event handler. So for instance, you can think about in the submit button of a form, you can use this kind of hook to move on in a different page. If you are going to exploit the route, which is something that we are going to do both in this lecture and in the labs, you have to remember that you can never use a plain hyperlink anymore. You have always to replace them with a link component, because plain hyperlink forces the refresh of the application, which is something that we don't want, because we said that we want to still fake a single page application because we don't want to lose, for instance, the states. So remember that now that we are going to switch to link, we can't use the traditional anchor anymore. We have to replace all of them with this tag. So here we have an additional example. All paths are relative unless they start with sharp, as is specified here. here in the home component, we have a navigation bar. Inside the navigation bar, we put 2 links. This is just a space to separate the 2 links, to not have the links stick one to the other. And we have the home link that simply bring the user to localhost /3000. And we have the about link that move to the about. Here we have the example that I anticipated to you before. We would like to, for instance, to create a function to manage an invoice, and we want that this component manage the insertion of a new invoice. When the invoice form is filled, we would like that the onSubmit method navigate to this link, which is invoice $newinvoice.id. As we can imagine, this form probably will go to add this invoice to the database, or simply to the data structure in the example that we saw so far. And then we address invoices /newinvoice.id to display this new inserted invoice. So, as already anticipated, we have also some link to active navigation. So when we create menu navigation element or something like that, it's useful to see which is the currently selected one. If you think, for instance, of the example of the film library, what we are doing in the labs, we have a sidebar on the left, and we ask you to highlight which is the selected filter. This is something that you can achieve using a navlink tag instead of a traditional link. This navlink simply knows if it is active or not, because inside this component we add a class which is called active, and this class could be addressed and could be customizable with CSS. So you can approach this component is two different way. You may create a callback inside the class name that receive the isActive status and decide which class to apply, so decide if I am active or not. Or you may create a callback inside the style tag, so you can directly write CSS in line according to the status. Obviously, you can proceed as you prefer, but personally, I prefer the class name approach because it's more in line to what we have seen so far. Unless you are very forced to do so, it's never a good idea to write inline style CSS because it's very painful to debug and to understand what is going on, while applying a class is always a better approach, in my opinion. Then we have dynamic routes. So it is something that I already anticipated to you. It is something very useful that is offered by the library. Routes may have parametric segment that are specified with a semicolon syntax. So as Facebook did, you can specify a route which is addressed by /post/id, and this ID will be available to the final element using this hook, which is called useParams. So for instance, here you have the route. In this route, you specify there is post/id, and then using this hook, you retrieve this ID. So useParams give to you an object which contains all the params that you specified here, because you can concatenate several params if you need them. So you can exploit the ID using the object notation, or you can get the param and then access to the ID. I don't know, for instance, you can write const param and then param.id, and you will get this value. Okay, something that I already told you. useParam return an object of key value pairs of the dynamic params from the current URL. And child. It is important also to notice that child routes inherit all param from their parent roots. So when you concatenate, if you want to concatenate URL with different params, you will get all of them. Here again, we will have a simple example. We are again talking about invoice. So we have this path which has invoices, semicolon invoice ID, which could be reasonably the same path that we see in the previous example. Inside the invoice component, we retrieve the invoice ID using this approach. So let invoice ID is param, and then we print the ID here. Or specifying the object, so let param use param, and then accessing the specific ID. Here you have an example of the URL. So we could have a URL like this one. Okay, location state, which is something very useful for passing information among pages. Right now, the only mechanism that we saw for passing information among pages is through an ID, through something which is parametric. But there are cases in which we need to pass more information, more complex data. For instance, think about the exam of the exam form of the React score example, or the film of our film library. It could be okay to pass an ID and then retrieve the data about the exam or about the film in a certain way. But for instance, right now we don't have a database to query. We don't have a backend to query. So it could be useful to pass complex information among pages. You can also think about very complex registration process in which you design a product that you want to order or something like that. It could be useful to pass complex information from one page to the other. To achieve this goal, to achieve this result, we can use this additional hook, which is called use location. So here you have an example. Here you use the use navigate hook to force the navigation to a different page, and you specify that together with the page that you want to address, you want also to pass this object, which is called user data. You can do that through the navigate hook. You can do that through the link, because it has an additional parameter under 2, I mean together with 2, which is state. And then when you are inside the component that is addressed by this use location, you can get this object using this hook, and then writing location.state, you can get this user data. So it is designed as to be something similar to a state. There is something, a big warning about this functionality, which is very nice. Objects sometimes are serialized not very well. It could happen that some library doesn't behave as we expect, because everything is serialized as a string, and then everything is deserialized as the object that you create before. For instance, we noticed that the.js has this kind of issue. So if you pass an object like an exam or a film, it is very reasonable that when you deserialize this object using this hook, you are not able to get the date correctly. It is not adequate rendered. So pass object, but try to not pass a very complex object. To solve this issue, we are going to pass the date as a string, and then we reserialize the date as the JS object. Okay? Okay, did you mean the React context, what we saw before? Okay, now you can still use context in, so the question was about, can I still use the context even when I enable React Router, right? Okay, yeah, obviously if you want, you can still use context, but I mean, it's the same concept. Context is used when you need to have something global, okay, like the language of your application, or a state if you are logged in, a state if you are logged in or not, something like that. This kind of mechanism is used when you need to pass something from a page to another, which is not something general as the context. It's something that you want to use in the target component, and then you don't need anymore, something like that. Okay, is it clear? Okay. The value may be retrieved. Okay. Yeah, I think that we say everything about that. Okay, you can also exploit search parameters, which is something that we did not exploit at this point in the course, but you probably notice when you visit other web application that it is quite common to find URL like this, in which you have, for instance, products, sort by date, we need some filter, or I don't know, if we talk about products, probably you can find also parameter like brand, or size, or something like that. We can get this search parameter using this hook, which is called simply use search params. This hook allows you to read and modify the query string of the location. So return the current version of the parameter and the function to modify them. It's very, very, very similar to use state. So you can see in the example, you have, here is written let, we suggest you to use const, but doesn't matter. You have search params, set search params, equal use search params. Then search params contain all the search param is an object, so you can access all the different parameter. And you have set search params, which is a callback, which is a hook that you can use to update these search params if you need. Okay, so basically we finish the theory part. We have a quick summary here to remember the important concept of React Router. So we have to wrap the entire application inside browser router. We have to use these three components to routing and rendering. So we need the routes to specify the set of routes that we want to address, which is important because you can also nest several layers of routes if you want. We have all the route, and don't forget to add the outlet component when you are using nested routing. For navigating, we are going to use this three approach: the link when we want to replace simply an anchor tag or a button or something like that, a nav link when we want to specify which link is active, or the use navigate or navigate component if you want to do this movement, this page change manually. For instead passing, retrieving parameters or something like that, we can use this three method, the use params for dynamic routes that will give you the possibility of taking something from the URL, the use search params that will allow you to get something from the query strings, and the use location tag, which is used for retrieving location.state, which is a more complex object. So, okay, that's all for the theory part. Now, if you want question time, otherwise we will have 15 minutes break, something like that, and then we start to program something. So we are going to take the old React score example of last week, and we are going to add routing to this example. Any question? Okay.